Well, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to our friends in the US. And nice to see Archer with us today. Usually we have two screens in here, but today our tech person isn't here, so unfortunately you can't see the screen. I wanted to talk today about feeling at home. I was thinking about how when we're in our home, for most people, at least some of that time, we feel very relaxed. We're just comfortable in our body. We're not really concerned about what we look like or what anybody thinks. We're just in a kind of relaxed flow, maybe in the kitchen, maybe having a shower, maybe getting into bed. Just a kind of a general ease. I think most people, at least some of the time, have that feeling. And I was thinking, how would it be if we could feel that feeling of ease, feeling at home, everywhere, all the time? Or maybe more of the time. Just feeling comfortable in all sorts of environments, not just in the kind of safety of our home. And I think it is possible to have that feeling of feeling at home, wherever we are. It is possible. I think part of the reason we feel at home when we're at home is because everything's familiar. We're familiar with our surroundings. We feel comfortable with our surroundings. We kind of know the things in our surroundings. And that feeling of familiarity we can actually also feel in other situations which, from a conventional sense, aren't necessarily particularly familiar. And to feel that sort of feeling of familiarity requires that we have some kind of felt, integrated understanding of what you could call, in Buddhism, the one principle. It's kind of a good question, like, oh, what is the one principle? What's the one principle of Buddhism? What's the one principle of Zen? What's the one principle of true wisdom? And there's kind of many different answers one could give, which is kind of fortunate. We wouldn't want to feel that there's just one rigid, fixed answer. But all the different answers are different ways of saying the same thing, really. So some people say the word intimacy is the one principle. Intimacy meaning feeling a sort of a brotherly, sisterly feeling towards everything. Being able to empathize with everyone and everything. Being able to imagine ourselves as that person or that thing. Plant, animal, insect, rock, river. Imagining ourselves as that, seeing ourselves in that. That's what the word intimacy means. And sometimes more descriptively, people talk about interpenetration. Interconnectedness, but interpenetration maybe, or interbeing is the word that Thich Nhat Hanh uses, interbeing. That we are, in fact, on close examination, on subtle examination. The boundary between us and every other thing dissolves. And all of these different ways of seeing it is a little bit like talking about no self, which is another way that sometimes people say the one principle. no separate self, no individual self that functions outside of influence from other things. And it's not too hard for us to look at ourselves and see that, of course, we don't function in a vacuum. Our whole life is completely and utterly dependent on an unimaginable number of things. Countless other beings are necessary for our own existence. So no self, no other. And the way I like to see it, that just my words for myself, is everything is me and I am everything. That's just kind of what comes up for me as my wording for it. I am everything. Everything is me. I am everything is kind of like a way of being empathic. I can see myself in every other thing. Or I hope I can. I like to try and function that way. When I meet someone, even if their actions seem hard, sort of inexplicable in some way, just having this sort of natural tendency to want to imagine what their world might be like, that they are acting in that way. And seeing myself in everything, and everything in me, seeing that my existence is completely and utterly because of everybody else and everything else. I'm made of everything other than myself. And sometimes people, the one principle is sometimes described more from a kind of a practice perspective. You could say present and connected. So present-minded, using our eyes, using our ears, being present in this present moment and feeling a kind of connectedness with it. That would be a practice way of just talking about the one principle. Present and connected, which is of course exactly what we do in Zazen. That's exactly what we do. In Zazen we practice being present-minded. We are present, of course we are here. Can't be anywhere else. We are here. But we practice being aware that we're here, being present-minded and feeling connectedness. And often we're just doing that with our breath, trying to be attentive to our breath or attentive to sounds or sometimes to sensations in the body. Being attentive to the thoughts that arise and letting them just drift past. The thought arises, we notice it and let it drift by. Like a cloud, just let it drift by. But the first thing is just to notice. So present and connected. So that practice in Zazen, bringing our attention just simply to the breath or to sounds, to feel present and connected, the result of that is a kind of a peacefulness in the body. The body starts to relax, the facial muscles relax, the breathing relaxes, shoulders relax, fingers relax, throat relaxes, spine relaxes. We're alert, but we're relaxed. So that kind of peaceful state of mind that we cultivate in Zazen means that we can be more sort of peaceful and relaxed just in the course of the day, and being sort of relaxed allows us to be receptive to these teachings. When we're relaxed, we're more able to receive not just the stimulus of the present moment, but these teachings about the intimacy of all things. That I am everything and everything is me. Become receptive to that possibility. If we don't have that relaxed frame of mind, we're really not likely to be receptive to it. These are very subtle teachings. They're easy to say in words, but very subtle to really feel and really live. Much more subtle to really live them and to notice the moments when we're not living them, which is the most important thing, is to notice when we don't. To notice when we're being a little combative or feeling a little superior or feeling defensive or any of those things that people feel. If if we don't have a certain amount of mental relaxation, we can't notice those things. We can't be receptive to what's going on. And I think also, if we can't really relax in Zazen, it will be hard to relax in our daily life. I mean, we'll have the moments of relaxation, like I mentioned at the beginning, that there's sort of, often people have some relaxation in their home. And other times we find a kind of relaxation that's not really genuine, true relaxation through external things like television or food or alcohol, entertainment of various kinds. Those things are okay, but the relaxation we get from those things is dependent on those things. So it's not really reliable in the bigger picture. It's much better to be able to relax by simply breathing in and breathing out. Being able to relax. Like I like to imagine being able to do that. So breathing in and breathing out in a very tense situation, like in a courtroom or something like that. Some very stressful situation. Could I, in a very stressful situation, breathe in, breathe out? Like you've just been pulled over by the police because you've been speeding, for example. Could you breathe in, breathe out? Wind down your window, yes, officer. They're the moments that it's really good to be able to relax. And they're the moments when things like entertainment and food aren't going to help. They're not going to help in those moments. And the other thing about that kind of relaxation is it doesn't tend to cultivate wisdom. It is relaxing in a certain kind of way, but it's not cultivating wisdom. And of course we want to, that's why you could say why Buddhism is a religion and not just a philosophy, because we value compassion. We value that feeling this interconnectedness with all things will make us care. That's what we value. We value caring for ourselves and for others. So Zazen's very powerful because it's available anytime. We can just take a breath. We can do one breath Zazen. And you can even do Zazen just by when you're picking up your cup of tea and you're stirring it and hearing the sound. That can be your Zazen, just that sound of stirring the tea. Maybe even coffee. Coffee feels slightly harder to call that Zazen, but I'm sure it can be. But yeah, cutting up carrots, the sound, that can be Zazen. Noticing that sound. So when we're more restful, even that by itself, I think, will help us feel more at home wherever we are. And it's nice to notice situations where you feel a little less at home, and could you just see if we could just try, breathe a little bit and say, this is actually my true home. This is as much my home as my lounge room. Can I make this my home? Can I let this be my home? We can practice that. But I think the way that we're most likely to feel at home is deeply integrating this teaching of I am everything and everything is me. And this is often why we do have retreats, because in a retreat situation where you're sitting Zazen day after day, the mind becomes supple enough that you can kind of crack open to these teachings and you really feel the truth of them. Like you feel the truth of them penetrate through your whole being. And then you have no doubt. Then it's like, oh my God, it is true. It's totally true. I've been hearing this for ages and I've been trying to think it. But now I finally get it. It's true. And then from there, we just have to look after that insight. We have to look after it. So this feeling at home, nothing is foreign, nothing is alien. We can see ourselves in everything. Even the person who is making our life most difficult, we can imagine, if I had their life and if I had the circumstances that they had, their upbringing, their schooling, their economic position in society, all of those things, if I had had all of that, I'd do that too. And really feel the truth of that. I'd be that person too if I'd had those exact experiences. It's a very compassionate way to view anything that we see that we feel is harmful or disagreeable to us in some way. So I'd like to share a couple of koans, and I was just thinking about the word itself, koan. So koan, in case you're not familiar with it, is a sort of often they're a dialogue between Zen masters and their disciples. It's not always, but it often is a sort of a conversation, often a very brief conversation between the teacher and their disciple, in which they're talking about essential matters, the essential truths of reality. And they're often a little cryptic and not easy to understand. They're almost always not easy to understand from a cognitive perspective. But they offer, if you contemplate them and work with them, they really offer a way to kind of assist us to become sharply focused on these key questions. What is this? What is this life? Who am I? They can help us become very sharply focused. So the word, generally speaking, is translated as a public case. So it's like a public display of a conversation between a teacher and the disciple. But the more subtle translation of the characters of ko and an, and I got this from Shohaku Okamura's book, Realizing Genjo Koan. Genjo Koan is a writing by Dogen Zenji, a Japanese Zen master from the 1200s, so it's 13th century. So the ko is referring to the equality of all things, that all things actually are essentially have a sort of an essential quality that is the same, kind of the equality of all things. We often say that everything has Buddha nature is one way that we say that in Zen. Buddha nature pervades the whole universe. Or a way I like to say it just in terms of practical ways, everything is worthy of respect. Everything is worthy of respect. Not most things, not some things. Everything is worthy of respect. That's another way of speaking about equality. Doesn't matter what it is. It can be a watch. It can be a person. It can be an insect. Everything is worthy of respect. How that respect looks, of course, is different in different situations. But we can be respectful even if we're having to be firm. Even if we're having to be firm with someone and saying, no, I'm sorry, you can't come in. I don't know you and I don't feel comfortable with you coming into my house. Even if it's some situation like that, you can still do it and have a feeling of respect in your mind. I'm sorry, no, you can't come in your mind. So we can always carry this respect. So the ko is talking about this equality of all things. And the an is talking about the uniqueness and the difference and the particularity of all things. I am Nettie and this is Bill. We're different, we're not the same. And we can celebrate the differences. So we can celebrate the differences and also see the equality at the same time. So ko and an, koan, is this equality and difference held together at the same time. And that can also be actually considered another way of saying reality. Reality is at the same time everything being uniquely different, manifesting and appearing differently, but unified as one at the same time. So I'll just read out the quote that I took from that book. It says, "The word koan expresses the reality of our own lives. We are at the intersection of equality," and then in brackets it's got some other words for equality, universality, unity, oneness of all things. So we're at the intersection of equality and inequality, difference, uniqueness, particularity, individuality. Reality or emptiness includes both unity and difference. So this is 2 koans I thought I would share. This one is from a collection called the Mumonkan. In English, that is the gateless barrier. And it goes like this. Feng Shui, equality and differentiation. A monk asked the priest Feng Shui, "Speech and silence are concerned with equality and differentiation. How can I transcend equality and differentiation?" Feng Shui said, "I always think of Qian Nan in March. Partridges chirp among the many fragrant flowers." So in this little dialogue, the monk is asking, how can I, when he says transcend equality and differentiation, I think what he's saying is, how can I kind of really understand that this is how the world is? Everything is different and everything is the same at the same time. How can I really know that and not just think it? How can I feel it and not just think it? Because the monk isn't quite feeling it, he's thinking it. He can't quite feel it. And the teacher says, I always think of Qian Nan in March, partridges chirp among the many fragrant flowers. And I think the reason I like this koan is this little poem is considered a pretty ordinary poem. It's like it's not a terribly grand poem. It's just so ordinary. Like we could just say something like, I think of Canberra in winter, the morning dew sparkling on the grass, something like that. We just make up any old thing about some experience that we're having right now. It's very ordinary. So the teacher is modeling to the monk the way to transcend the concept of equality and differentiation. The way to transcend just the concept of it and actually feel it is just to notice that there's, we've got dappled sunlight here on the rugs. There it is, it's just right here. It's nothing far away, it's just right here. And as simple as, it's like it's hidden in plain sight. Just like our breathing is hidden in plain sight. We have this amazing breathing that we can do any time. We can just become very present by just breathing in and breathing out. So simple, always available to us, and yet many people may go through their whole life without ever really consciously noticing their breathing. They might notice that they're anxious and they're breathing like that, or they might notice their breathing is heavy because they've been running. They might notice something about their breathing. But just to be fully present with just a single breath, I think a lot of people don't actually do that, even though they breathe for their whole life. So it's hidden in plain sight, our ability to breathe, and just the incredible magnificence of the ordinary world. So there's the teacher just showing it to his student. He doesn't answer with theory, because theory is exactly the thing that the monk is having trouble with. He's stuck in theory. This is another koan from the same collection, case 37. Jiao Zhou, oak tree in the courtyard. A monk asked Jiao Zhou, "What is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the west?" That saying, what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the west? Bodhidharma travelled from India to China, bringing the teachings with him. So that question is a kind of standard question that's often asked of teachers over the centuries, and it's another way of saying, what is this all about? Like, why are we doing all this? It's another way of asking that. And Jiao Zhou said, "The oak tree in the courtyard." Then the monk said, "Don't teach me in reference to objective things." And Jiao Zhou said, I don't teach you in reference to objective things. This is another case that I like very much. You can imagine that Jiao is, maybe they're sitting in the zendo and the doors are open, screen doors, and they can see the oak tree. That might be what they're doing. Or they might be sitting in a courtyard and there's an oak tree. Doesn't really matter, just whatever picture you create in your own mind. And the monk is asking him, like, why are we doing all of this? And he just points and says, the oak tree in the courtyard. And the monk says, don't teach me about things that are external like that. I want something else. And he says, I'm not teaching you about something external. So he's trying to again, indirectly, through a kind of a felt experience, say, that oak tree is you. That oak tree is me. We're that oak tree. He doesn't say that because then you could just go like, oh, okay, I'm that oak tree, right. I'll remember that. And it's not going to get you very far. He just says that. And what I like about that koan, going back to, can we feel at home everywhere? You can imagine in this dialogue, Jiao is probably just sitting. You can just imagine he's sitting there. His whole body would be relaxed. He's just at ease. He's asked a question and he doesn't hesitate. He just looks up and sees the oak tree. It's not the oak tree particularly. He could have looked up and said, it's the incense burning. Could have said anything. He's relaxed, he's at home. He's completely at home. Wherever he is, he's at home. And the monk, you can imagine, the monk is not feeling quite at home. The monk is thinking. The monk's trying to work things out. And in his trying to work things out, he's probably not really noticing the oak tree. He's probably not really noticing the smoke coming up off the incense in the zendo. He's probably thinking, what's this all about? Why are we doing this? You can see he's thinking about his own thoughts and not the actual world that he's in. And it's nice to always imagine. You don't find out often. Sometimes in the commentaries they tell you what happens next, but often they don't. There's just these little, just got this little kind of snippet of a conversation. But I always like to think, just because it's nice to think that way, that somehow the monk just like, oh. Sometimes it says, and then he had great realization, or then she was greatly awakened. But sometimes it doesn't give us that line. But sometimes with things like this too, at the time the monk might have just furrowed his brow and being like, I'm confused, but okay. But that doesn't mean that maybe later he was sitting in Zazen and all of a sudden he might have realized what the teacher was doing when the teacher went, the oak tree in the courtyard. So that's the main thought that I wanted to leave with everybody today, is this imagining what would it be like to feel at home wherever you are, and that this is possible, that we can feel at home wherever we are. And until we get to the point of feeling at home wherever we are, we can start to feel more at home in more places. Yeah. All right, so I think I'll finish here. Would anyone like to ask a question? Anyone on Zoom like to ask a question? If you want to, just put up your hand. In the Zendo, you can just go like this. Any sort of question or any sort of comment is welcome. Kai.
Hi there, Nettie. Hi, everyone. That was the most relaxing talk I think I've ever sat with. It was so nice. And I felt really at home, even though I am in my home. I'm going to try and bring that feeling with me tomorrow when I go out into the real world, see how it works. But I have a feeling it's going to work pretty well as long as I keep focused on the breath and on being present and not running off with my, my thoughts all the time about my reactions or my judgments or my impressions or my dog barking right now. So thank you. Thank you for bringing this topic to us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kai. And actually, that reminds me of another way we can notice how we're not too much at home sometimes. Is often we're thinking just a few minutes ahead, like, what am I going to do next? We're doing this and we're already starting to lean into what we're going to do next. I remember when I first started practicing and did my first retreat, I really noticed how much I did that. Everything I was doing, I was thinking about, so when the Zazen's over, we're going to do Kinhin. Then I'm doing Kinhin, I'm thinking, how many more blocks of Zazen are there? 2, okay. And while we're on the last one, like, and then we have lunch, I wonder what we're going to have. And while we're having lunch, it'll be good to get a break. And like the whole time I was always leaning into the next thing. Like I really, really was. And it was just so interesting. We all know we do it a little bit, but I really noticed in retreat that I did it almost continually. I was almost always initially leaning into what's next. And I think that feeling of doing that is actually a little bit why sometimes people feel later in their lives, sometimes people think like what they don't feel satisfied, like what have I been doing for 60 years? Because the whole time they were thinking about what they're going to do next. And I'm happy to report that over time I actually could sit in retreat and just completely be there, and then the bell would ring, oh, there we go, end of the Zazen period, and I hadn't been anticipating. So yeah. Bill?
Yeah, when I went to retreat at Vipassana, the first few days I was able to really immerse myself in the teaching and live the practice and stuff. But then I think because I was starting to anticipate having to go out into the real world again, I started to not be nearly as relaxed and couldn't still my mind in the practice anymore. And I think it's a relevant for as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can get more and more subtle, this kind of not leaning into what's going to come next. We can actually reel back to the point where we're 100% just doing what we're actually doing. We do know that we have to leave at a certain time, like it's as we don't know what's coming next, but we can actually fully do what we're doing. The more we sit regular Zazen and value being present, value being aware, we do get better at it. Yeah. All right. So we finish with a closing chant, and then we get up and if you'd like to in the Zendo get up and bow with me, you can get up and bow as well. So beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. And also, those who are on Zoom,